This podcast is sponsored by Skylight Frame. Mother's Day is almost here. What are you getting her? Something that shows you care. Something that makes her feel loved. Something that won't stress you out. Something like the Skylight Frame. The Skylight Frame is the perfect gift. It's a touchscreen photo frame your whole family can upload photos to, from wherever they are in the world. It's a way to share with her all the moments that matter. It sets up in seconds. You can even make sure that it's already loaded with photos when your mom opens her Mother's Day gift. And her Skylight Frame can hold thousands of the treasured photos you share. It's an easy, heartfelt way for mom to stay connected with those who matter most. It really is the perfect gift. Now, as a special Mother's Day offer for our listeners, get 15% off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/easy. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/easy. Get 15% off your Mother's Day purchase now at skylightframe.com/easy.
This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello, and welcome back to the Curious Kid Podcast. Happy Groundhog Day. For those of you that may not know what Groundhog Day is, it's the day when we learn whether spring will arrive early or whether winter will continue for another 6 weeks.
And we learn how much winter is left from a groundhog.
That's right. The Groundhog Day tradition goes back at least 180 years. There is a town in western Pennsylvania with a pretty funny name.
It's called Punxsutawney.
That's the one. About 40,000 people have been gathering in Punxsutawney every year on Groundhog Day to wait for a groundhog sighting. That's a really big number since only about 5,000 people live in the town of Punxsutawney all year round.
The groundhog's name is Punxsutawney Phil.
And guess what? It's the groundhog named Punxsutawney Phil that decides the weather.
If he sees his shadow, there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter. And if he doesn't see a shadow, spring will be here early.
You may be wondering how accurate a groundhog is in predicting the weather. It turns out it's not very accurate at all.
He's less accurate than random chance.
That's right. Random chance is 50%. In other words, if you do something that has 2 possible outcomes, let's say flipping a coin, and you do it 100 times, you would expect it to land on heads about 50 times and on tails about 50 times. Well, the groundhog's accuracy is less than 50%. A top meteorologist by the name of Tim Roche says the groundhog is only right 36% of the time, which means only 36 out of 100 times. The Storm Facts Almanac puts his accuracy at 39%, which is only slightly better.
Sorry to ruin Groundhog Day for you.
Yeah, it's a fun tradition, but don't get too caught up in what the groundhog does today. We are not getting curious about Groundhog Day today, but we did want to learn about it a little because this episode happens to come out on Groundhog Day. Olivia, what are we getting curious about today?
Today we're getting curious about the heart.
The heart is so interesting, and there is so much to learn.
You should also check out our episode on blood. It goes nicely with this episode.
That's a great point. We recorded an episode on blood back in June, so if you love this episode, you're definitely going to want to check that one out. It was episode number 39, and today you're listening to humongous episode 70. What's the question of the week?
The question of the week is, how many times does your heart beat in 1 minute?
This podcast is sponsored by Skylight Frame. Mother's Day is almost here. What are you getting her? Something that shows you care. Something that makes her feel loved. something that won't stress you out. Something like the Skylight Frame. The Skylight Frame is the perfect gift. It's a touchscreen photo frame your whole family can upload photos to, from wherever they are in the world. It's a way to share with her all the moments that matter. It sets up in seconds. You can even make sure that it's already loaded with photos when your mom opens her Mother's Day gift. And her Skylight Frame can hold thousands of the treasured photos you share. It's an easy, heartfelt way for mom to stay connected with those who matter most. It really is the perfect gift. Now, as a special Mother's Day offer for our listeners, get 15% off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/easy. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/easy. Get 15% off your Mother's Day purchase now at skylightframe.com/easy.
So, when you were much younger, a heart is one of the first shapes you learned how to draw. Do you think the actual heart looks the same as the heart shape you draw?
No, I don't think it looks like that at all.
The one you draw looks like the heart all of us will be seeing shortly on Valentine's Day, but that doesn't look like an actual heart. What does a real heart look like?
It's about the size of a fist, and it looks like a fist.
The heart does something in our body that's really, really important.
It helps supply the body with oxygen.
And it does that by pumping blood throughout the body.
The heart pumps blood from your head to your toes.
And the blood carries oxygen to wherever it needs to go.
It does this by pumping over and over again.
The heart is a muscle, and it's strong enough to supply the whole body with oxygen. It would be able to pump blood well over 30 feet away.
The heart is separated into 4 parts called chambers.
The chambers are called the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. Let's pretend that we are blood moving through the body so we can understand how this works.
First, you have blood without oxygen.
The blood without oxygen just pumped throughout the body, and it's really tired. It's looking for oxygen. What part of the body do you think the blood will get oxygen from?
It needs to get oxygen from the lungs.
That's right. In order to get to the lungs, the blood will need to travel through the right side of the heart. There are 2 roads the blood can take to get to the heart. They are called the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava. They are both veins that take blood to the right side of the heart.
The blood enters the heart in the right atrium.
That's the first chamber the blood goes through to get oxygen. Once the blood is in the right atrium, it needs to drop into the right ventricle. In order to do this, a valve that separates the 2 chambers needs to open up.
That valve is called the tricuspid valve.
It's important to know that blood can only travel one way inside the heart. It's like a one-way road. The tricuspid valve opens up to let blood from the right atrium into the right ventricle. Blood cannot go in the other direction.
From there, the pulmonary valve opens and the blood goes through.
The blood then travels through the pulmonary artery into the lungs to get oxygen. If you remember from our episode on blood, veins take blood to the heart and arteries take blood away from the heart. So let's recap the first half of the process. The blood enters the heart from 2 veins, called the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava. The blood enters into the right atrium until the tricuspid valve opens to let the blood into the right ventricle. Then the pulmonary valve opens to let the blood into the pulmonary artery, which leads to the lungs, where the blood picks up oxygen, finally. The word pulmonary is a big word, but it just means something related to the lungs.
Now the blood has yummy oxygen and it can go to all the body parts.
But first, it needs to go through the left part of the heart.
It takes the pulmonary vein to the left side of the heart.
Again, veins go to the heart and arteries go away. So it makes sense that the pulmonary vein takes blood from the lungs to the heart.
It goes into the left atrium.
Then the bicuspid valve opens, dropping the blood into the left ventricle. You may remember that the valve on the right side of the heart was called the tricuspid valve, And now the one on the left is called the bicuspid valve.
What's up with those silly names?
The tricuspid valve on the right side has 3 cusps. It's easy to remember this because a tricycle has 3 wheels. Tricuspid, tricycle. The bicuspid valve on the left side has 2 cusps.
And a bicycle has 2 wheels.
That's right. Bicycle, bicuspid. You got it. The really important part to remember is that the valves are there to prevent blood from traveling the wrong way. So the bicuspid valve opened and the blood traveled into the left ventricle. The bicuspid valve then closes, preventing the blood from going the wrong way back into the left atrium.
Now it's time for the blood to leave the heart and bring oxygen to all the places that need it.
The blood goes from the left ventricle through the aortic valve and into the aorta.
The aorta is the biggest artery in the body.
And it needs to be because it needs to carry all the blood from the heart and direct it to different blood vessels to supply the whole body with oxygen.
How about we sum everything up real quick?
Great idea. The heart has 4 chambers and 4 valves. First, the blood has no oxygen. It starts in the right atrium and passes through the tricuspid valve to get to the right ventricle. Then it goes through the pulmonary valve to get to the lungs, where it picks up oxygen. Then the oxygenated blood goes to the left side of the heart, starting with the left atrium. It passes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Finally, it passes through the aortic valve and into the aorta to bring oxygen all over the body.
The heart works so hard. This must take a really long time.
Well, let's see. How many times do you think the heart beats in 1 minute?
I think the heart beats about 50 times in a minute.
A healthy heart beats anywhere from 60 to 100 times per minute while you are resting.
There are only 60 seconds in a minute. That's about 1 beat a second. That's crazy.
And it's even slightly more for younger kids. At 5 or 6 years old, for example, the heart can beat up to 115 times per minute at rest.
Does the heart beat more when you exercise?
It sure does. You know you are getting a good workout if your heart beats about 50% more often when you exercise. You want to be careful and make sure you don't overdo it though.
Are animal hearts like human hearts?
Sometimes, but there are some really interesting animal hearts we can talk about. You might remember that a human heart is about the size of a fist.
The cow's heart is about the size of a human's head.
But that's not the biggest heart. The biggest animal heart belongs to the blue whale, which has a heart that weighs about 400 pounds.
So how big is that?
That's more than 2 times heavier than me.
The heart of a frog has only 3 chambers.
That's right. The frog heart has 2 atria, that's the plural for atrium, and only 1 ventricle.
Do all animals have hearts?
Nope. There are a few animals out there without hearts. They include the starfish and the jellyfish. The jellyfish doesn't have a heart or a brain. Amazing stuff. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's podcast, number 70, on hearts.
Great job, Olivia. Hey, listeners, can I call you Curious Kid Potties? Thanks so much for listening to our podcast. If you love our podcast, don't forget to drop us a line and say hi during the week. You can send us an email to curiouskidpodcast@gmail.com to let us know what you were curious about. We get curious about listener suggestion topics every other week now. So give us something to get curious about. Leave us your name, age, and hometown so we can say thanks. Don't forget to check us out on social media for even more from Curious Kid Podcast. This week, we've got another great promo for you to listen to. Our family loves soccer. We watch Major League Soccer and are supporters of the New York Red Bulls. If you love soccer like we do, you are going to really enjoy the 2 Rash Challenges podcast. They discuss Premier League Soccer, Major League Soccer, the men's national team, and more. Get your soccer fix and check out 2 Rash challenges for a fun and entertaining look at everything soccer. Join us next week for a fun listener suggestion episode. As always, thank you so much for listening and getting curious with us.
I'm Dave Lewis, a massive Liverpool supporter.
And I'm Eric Neal, Newcastle United, Toon Black and White Army.
We're the hosts of 2 Rash Challenges, a weekly podcast about the English Premier League, Champions League, MLS, the men's national team, and whatever else strikes our fancy in the world of football.
Look for us on iTunes and Transistor, and check us out on Twitter at @Rash_podcast.
Hey, it's the podcast nobody asked for.